My name is Lisa Smith. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of the Washington State Microenterprise Association. And we are here today in collaboration and partnership with the Washington State Department of Commerce, Small Business Resiliency Network, Jessica Camacho, and the Governor's Office of Regulatory Innovation and Assistance, ORIA, with Hugo Nicolas. And we're presenting this webinar today as an effort to support the nonprofits all over the state that are working with the very smallest businesses. This collaboration came together because of the alarm our organization had and the feedback and the calls that of nonprofits all over the state that were concerned about what was happening. And I was so fortunate to have a conversation with Jessica Camacho and Hugo about how we might work together to create training programs and webinars so that we could all learn together about doing this work that needs to be done when there are hardly any resources and so many barriers to supporting people on the ground and businesses on the ground who are facing threats, deportation, and other concerns. And so I just want to say humbly a word of gratitude to both of these humans. Hugo, would you introduce yourself, and then Jessica?
Hi, everyone. My name is Hugo Nicolas, and again, I'm with ORIA, Governor's Office for Regulatory Innovation and Assistance. Thank you for everybody being here. Just want to make sure that I am clear that no business operates in a vacuum. So we know that federal actions like immigration enforcement really have an impact on our streets, on our job sites, in our workforce, in our farms. And really disrupt operations to our business. So as part of the Washington Small Business Liaison team, I just want to say that we hear you, we feel you, and we support you. And this is the reason we are partnering with Lisa and Jessica Camacho to support you. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce Jessica Camacho.
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you as well, everyone, for joining us. I know that we're living in very difficult times, trying to understand what changes are impacting our business community right now. And I want to acknowledge that it's tough out there. It's tough out there, and I know that you're feeling it. I appreciate that you are here today to continue to learn and to empower yourself, empower community, so that they have the important resources to make a decision on their own on how to proceed with operating their business. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you for your willingness to share out this information as well out into your business community. I want to acknowledge our Small Business Resiliency Network members that are in this session. So I see several on the call here. Devin has been a huge advocate for this type of work, making sure that we are sharing information about ICE, sharing information about the federal changes. I know it's difficult and I know it's hard, and there's a lot of situations that we're navigating where we don't have the answers to. But it is still our responsibility to push out this information out into community, what we do know and what we do have. Sometimes what you'll notice, and possibly even with this presentation, is that information is going to change. And it will kind of feel like a bit like the pandemic, where information was already outdated by the end of the day. So please hang in there with us. If you have any questions, if you're needing additional resources, feel free to reach out to the three of us. We will do whatever it takes to get you that information, to get you some answers. We realize that even within our own roles, we cannot make changes that sometimes community expects us to make, especially navigating these very difficult federal changes. But I do want to share that we're here and we're living this with you all. Hugo, myself, we're both people of color, and so we see it impacting our own families, our own communities, and I just want to acknowledge that we appreciate you, and I hope that you can get a lot of good information and insight from this session. So I'll pass it back to Lisa, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, all of you. Just a reminder, this webinar is intended to strengthen small businesses in their capacity to navigate deportation and other concerns impacting employers, compliance with existing rules, and increasing capacity to operate under state and federal regulations. I want to just say how humbled I am to work with these leaders, these speakers today. And I'd like us all to just hold Kripa Upadhyaya in your hearts. She has been doing such amazing work around the state and holding so many people and businesses and helping them work through I-9 audits and so much more. She had to attend a memorial this morning, so she will not be joining us. And so just hold her in your heart. I'd like to introduce Stephanie Powell, who is an immigration attorney in Olympia, Washington. She'll be our first speaker. And then Lorena Lowell, who is a small business program manager with the Washington State Department of Commerce. They will be introducing themselves. And I want to say that this is a little bit different than our webinar that we held in April. This is an opportunity for all of us to ask questions and to engage with these speakers after they're finished. This whole program is being recorded, but we're going to pause the recording during the question and answer session so that we can retain the video for future publication. So without further ado, I just want to say humbly, thank you, Stephanie Powell, for being here and doing an introduction to the I-9 audit and then going into your full-on presentation.
All right, thank you, Lisa, and thank you, everyone. I understand that these are very uncertain times. I do believe that knowledge is power, but only when we're fully aware of our rights can we feel our power, right? And I'm with you, I'm with my clients, I'm with my community. We had an ICE raid in Olympia today. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on in immigration courts. I won't go into that, but just know that I'm aware of how uncertain and how terrifying these times are for all of you, all of us, right? We're in community together around this. I've been an immigration attorney for about 33 years. You'll hear I have a bit of an accent. I'm from Kentucky, but I've been in Washington State for 20 years. I always thought I would do this for about 5 years and then move on to something different. And here I am 33 years later, right? So it's important for me to let you know that I'm an immigration attorney. I am not a constitutional expert, but of course, immigration law, criminal law, constitutional law, it all combines at some point. I also want to make sure I point out that even if we know our rights, feel our power, use our rights, there are times when Immigration and Custom Enforcement, and I'm going to refer to them as ICE from here on out, and other government agencies may not play fair. But our best chances are to wrap ourselves in our constitutional rights and push back. I'm going to share a bit of a slideshow real quickly, just to have something for you to look at while I'm speaking. Just a second. Everyone, I hope, can see that.
Looks great.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Kripa is more of an I-9 audit expert, so I'm just going to go over briefly some of the highlights. So, you know, an I-9 audit is when ICE comes to your business, right, to check and see if you have followed the rules for the Form I-9, which of course that form confirms that a worker is authorized to work in the United States and also confirms their identity. So all employers need to have I-9s completed on behalf of their new hires, right? Employers must keep these I-9 forms for 3 years or 1 year after the last day of employment of an individual. Employers are not required to make an employee complete an I-9 more than once unless, in certain situations, if they present an employment authorization card that is about to expire, then in that situation, they might ask them to complete another once their employment authorization card has been extended. Employers do not need to keep copies of the workers' IDs in their files, okay? If ICE notifies an employer of an I-9 audit, you have 3 days to produce the I-9s that you have in your records. And I highly advise any employer who's been notified that they're under an I-9 audit to contact a lawyer before answering any questions and before providing any documents. If during that audit, ICE finds that you have unauthorized employees, they'll give you 10 days to provide valid work authorizations, or they will ask that you end the employment of those employees. An employer may also face a stop order, right? No more hiring folks who are undocumented and may be subject to civil or criminal fines and penalties. So that is kind of an I-9 audit in a nutshell. All right, and I am just going over that quickly I think some of you may have been in CREPA's previous presentation, so that's a reminder. And if there are new folks who are here today, and then you want more information on I-9s, please reach out to us and I'll provide more information. All right, so I want to talk to you about ICE workforce enforcement actions. We'll refer to them as raids, where these are surprise actions that can, at best, temporarily disrupt your business, right? And at worst, result in detention and arrest of your employees. For that reason, we all want to know our rights to protect ourselves, to protect our employees, and to protect our businesses. One of the things I notice I do when I do these presentations is I kind of say the same thing over and over and over, but it's my attempt to make sure that I'm saying it clearly, that it's understood, and that it's sticking, right? Because I could probably do this in about 3 minutes, but I'm going to extend it to about 20 minutes because I want to say it over and over in so many ways. Okay, so a raid is where ICE appears at your place of employment without any warning as part of an investigation into an employer. They may also go to a business to find a particular person or people. And while they're there, they may try to question, detain, or even arrest other folks who are in the vicinity. ICE agents are not police officers, right? But their uniforms may say police. They may identify themselves as the police, right? Even though they're not. Or it may say federal agents. They may carry guns. In some states, local police officers will accompany ICE agents during the raids. In Washington State, law enforcement is prohibited from enforcing federal immigration law and participating in such raids. However, sometimes they might be present when they feel like there's a need for public safety. So for instance, if ICE is coming to a workplace looking for an individual with a dangerous criminal record, they might have local law enforcement kind of in the background for public safety purposes, right? But it's important to document that if law enforcement is involved, because we would want to make sure they were there actually just for the purpose of public safety and not enforcing immigration laws, because in Washington State that should not happen. And we can all imagine how disruptive and terrifying it might be to have armed officers storm a business, and they storm a business, right? They don't arrive with their best manners. They prefer to forcibly rush into a business and create fear and chaos, because if they create fear and chaos, you might forget your rights. Employees might panic and give them information that could harm them, right? So they have an intent to create chaos, to create fear and confusion. But if we have a plan, and if we have a plan that we've practiced, maybe we won't feel overwhelmed and forget that we have rights, right? That we have rights during these raids and that we can push back on their chaos. So, what are these rights? You when ICE is on the premises of a business, they don't always have the right to enter the business, to stop or arrest your workers or take documents, right? They don't have the right. They're going to say they have the right, but they don't always have the right. Just like me, if I were to go to a business, I have the right to enter the public space of any business. You have the right to enter the public space of any business. For instance, we go to restaurants, we sit in the dining room, that's the public space. The bathroom, that's public. But I don't have the right to go behind the counter. I don't have the right to go in the kitchen. I don't have the right to go into the office and start looking at documents, right? That's your private space. ICE does not have the right to enter that private space unless under two circumstances, right? So remember, they're allowed in the public space, so we can think dining areas, parking lots, the lobby, or the waiting area of a business, fine, no problem. They can come in, but that's as far as they can come in unless they meet other requirements, okay? So I want to start with the best way to protect a business, to protect yourself, is to train any front office, front lobby, front business staff, right? To know what to say if ICE tries to leave the public space and enter a private space. The very first thing that trained front office or front line staff should say is, I cannot give you permission to enter. You need to speak to my employer. I cannot give you permission to enter. You need to speak to my employer. That's the very first thing that they need to say. And that is the only thing they need to say, except I'll add a little bit more in a minute. So all employees, so not just the front office or the front line staff, should be trained this, because what if another employee is walking through a public space and ICE says, we're going back into that private office, and that employee says, oh, okay, go ahead, right? They just gave them permission. And ICE can enter your private areas of any business if they have permission. So it's very important that all staff, all employees, everyone involved with your enterprise is trained to say, I can't give you permission to do that. You need to speak to my employer or my supervisor. I can't give you permission, okay? So sometimes we think because they are the power that we have to say, yes, please, by all means, enter. But no, just like you wouldn't let me come into your private space of your business, they're just the same. We do not have to let them come into the private place of our business unless they have a judicial warrant, a valid judicial warrant, which I'll talk about in a few more minutes. But a good tip is, in any business, you should have private signs everywhere that's private, and not just one. If you think of a restaurant, you have your very public dining area and your bathroom. Every other doorway or entryway should have private or private do not enter. Go to the hardware store, buy those signs, write private or private do not enter, and post them everywhere, because you're putting them on alert that if they walk past that doorway, that entryway, they have come into a private spot and they have violated the rights of the employers, right, or the business. So it's very important, because imagine me again. Let's say I go to a restaurant and I go in a hallway and I open a door and I'm looking for a bathroom, and I open a door and I go in, and someone says, you can't be in here, this is private. And I said, I didn't know it was private. Oh, wait a minute, what's that on the desk there? That looks like a blah, 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 right? I now have some reasonable suspicion that something's going on, because I didn't know that was a private space. I walked in, I saw something that gave me reasonable suspicion, and then maybe I'm not violating your rights so much. So it's very, very important to make sure that all private areas of any enterprise have private do not enter signs. Okay, very, very important. So if any employee gives ICE permission to enter, they do not need a warrant, because you gave them permission to enter. And they can investigate, they can look for certain documents, employment-related documents. They can shut down equipment and ask employees all to stay in one room because they're going to come talk to them. So very important to understand, we cannot give permission. The second thing, the second way that they can enter from public to private space is if they have a valid judicial warrant. It must be a valid judicial warrant. And that means it must be issued by a court. So at the top of the warrant, it would say district court or state court. It would be signed by a judge at the bottom. It would specify the area they plan to search or the people they're there to arrest, right? Very important that we understand the difference between a valid judicial warrant versus something else that they try to use, which is an ICE administrative warrant. An ICE administrative warrant is not a valid judicial warrant. If you can imagine, there's two ICE officers. They show up at work in the morning, and ICE officer number one says, "Hey, buddy, sign this this form 200, or there's two types of forms, right? There's an I-200 or an I-205. Sign this form because I'm going to go down to this restaurant and I'm going to go back there because I believe that there's undocumented workers in the back," right? So the buddy signs the form. The ICE officer goes to the business, goes to the front staff and says, "I'm going into those private areas. I have a warrant." So the front staff person, I want to step back. When I said they have to remember, I cannot give you permission. You must speak to my supervisor. The supervisor or the employer comes out and says, "I'm not going to give you permission to go into the private areas of my business. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Move on." And the ICE officers, "Oh, I have a warrant." And the supervisor or employer or whoever is designated by the business needs to inspect that warrant. If you see that it's a form that is just an administrative warrant, you'll see a sample. I'm sorry, it's so small, but there's a sample here. That is not a valid judicial warrant. What they're doing is they're saying, "I have a warrant," wink, wink. I'm going to go in. Do you give me permission to go in? And if you're not aware that an administrative warrant is not a valid judicial warrant, and you think the game's up, you're going to give them permission to enter. So what did you just do? You gave them permission to enter. Even under false, right? That's kind of a false premise there. They're saying, "I have a warrant, therefore I'm going in. Can I go in?" And if you say, "Oh, I guess this is a warrant, I have to let them in," you gave them permission to enter. So they're fine. They're free to go in, right? So very important to understand the difference between a judicial and an administrative warrant, and to understand administrative warrant is trash. You do not have to abide by it. You can say, "This is not a valid warrant. I am not permitting you into the private areas of my business." If it is a judicial warrant, they will serve the warrant on an employee, and they're going to then alert the other agents that are outside to come in. All right. Sometimes they'll all come in at one time. Sometimes one will come in and hand the warrant, a valid judicial warrant signed by a judge, issued by a court, that states specifically the type of documents they're there to retrieve or the person they're there to arrest. They will alert the others to come in, and they just kind of storm in, right? Another thing about a judicial warrant that folks need to be aware of, it's got to be on the right dates. So sometimes they may get a judge, and remember, to get a judicial warrant, you have to go to a judge, not an immigration authority at all, but a judicial judge, and say, "I have evidence that immigration laws have been violated." And the judge will review the evidence and then issue the warrant, right? That's why oftentimes they don't have warrants, because they don't do the work. They don't know who's working at that business down the street, right? They're just making assumptions. If they do the work and they have all the evidence that crimes have been committed or immigration laws have been violated or the person that they've been looking for works there, they'll take that evidence to the judge and ask for a judicial warrant. And that's why they're so strong. If someone shows up to your business with a judicial warrant, the game's up. You got to let them come in to get those documents or to arrest that individual if they're there that day. But if that judicial warrant is outdated, meaning the judge issued it in April and they show up in May because they've been so busy, that's not a valid warrant anymore. You can say this is outdated. And you got to also make sure it's the right business. Sometimes they'll use the same warrant and go to 3 different businesses on the same day. So you have to check. Someone in your business needs to verify that the information on that judicial warrant is correct. It has the correct dates or the date span. It has the correct name of the business, the address, and it specifies what they're permitted to do, right? Just because they're permitted to come in and seize payroll records and Social Security correspondence and employment records, IDs, and so forth, doesn't mean they can go in the back and interrogate, right, all the workers, but they will, right? Because someone will give them permission to do that, most likely, because you think, oh, they're here, I have to give them permission to do whatever. You don't have to. Many times, once they're in, they will ask that any equipment be shut down and all of the employees be gathered into one room. All right. So if they get past the front line, if they gain someone's permission to enter the private space, or if they have a warrant to enter the private space, then what? It is so important that if they're in the workplace, the private space, that the employees say nothing. Say nothing. If they are there to arrest an individual, they will arrest that individual, right? They'll say, I'm here for such and such. Here's a valid judicial warrant for their arrest. That person needs to go with them. It's very important that the employer does not hide the employee, does not encourage the employee to run, right? Once there's a valid judicial warrant with that person's name on it, not an administrative warrant, but a valid judicial warrant, then that person needs to go with them. But oftentimes they're there for one person. They put all the employees in a room, and they do this thing where they ask folks to self-sort. And again, this is power. These are people with guns. You've seen them with their faces covered, just their eyes. They're all, big guys and women, they're very imposing. And so they say, okay, all these employees, I want folks who are citizens and permanent residents to line up over here. I want folks with valid employment authorization cards to line up here. And I want anyone who's undocumented, who lacks proper documentation for employment, to line up over here. And if you self-sort, what did you just do? You just gave them information that they need to arrest you. The people who lined up on this side of the room just gave those officers probable cause, right? They admitted that they're in the country without proper documentation. It's a technique that they use. They're fishing. They go into a pond, they see a bunch of fish, and they throw in the bait. So what we have to do is know we don't have to take that bait. Nobody should move. Nobody gets in a line at all. And this is where training everyone who works for an organization, a business, an enterprise, nobody moves. They need to do the work. They need to prove who you are. They need to prove what your immigration status is. They need to prove that you're in violation. Don't do the work for them. And this is what's happening across the country, is ICE goes into an enterprise, creates chaos, creates fear, asks people to self-sort. People self-sort because they don't know that they can't. And then you see 17 people marched out of a building and put in a bus, right? But if everyone just stayed still and they did not participate because there's no warrant with their name on it, right? Then those enforcement raids would not be as successful as they unfortunately are. Okay? And very important to stay calm. Do not run. If someone runs, that gives the ICE officer probable cause to arrest them, because they view it as an admission of guilt. So again, stay calm, don't run, but use their constitutional rights to say nothing. I'm going to remain silent. I'm not going to answer those questions. And the employer should say, we would like to get an attorney here No, it's important that the employer not yell, don't say anything, everybody be quiet. Don't do that, because that might be interfering. Everyone should know before ICE ever arrives that they have the right to remain silent, do not answer questions, right? Everyone should know that way before ICE ever arrives. But the employer can say, I'm going to call an attorney to come down before any questions are answered, right? And I guarantee, no, I don't guarantee anything under this administration, but if no one is taking the bait, right, they're not going to stay there all day with a bunch of silent people. And if they don't know who you are, what your immigration status is, and so forth and so on, how are they going to arrest you? What are they going to put on the arrest document? Name unknown, country unknown, immigration status unknown, right? That's why we have to use our constitutional rights and not provide the information they need to arrest us. If they have an administrative warrant, again, with someone's name on it, the employer does not have to say the employee is working that day, and the employer does not have to take the agents to the employee if they are in the building. Again, administrative warrants are nothing, right? They're just nothing. They will try to make them sound like they're true warrants, but they are not. The best way is just, again, to remain silent, ask for an attorney. Workers do not need to hand over any IDs. And again, they'll make people believe they have to hand over IDs and identify themselves. They do not have to. Do not, right? Any information workers give to ICE can be used against them. Do not self-sort. After the raid, immediately write down everything. How many agents were inside? How many agents were outside? How were the agents dressed? How were they armed? Did the agents make you or your workers believe you could not leave, right? If an employer says, are my workers, the shift is over, are my workers free to leave? And the agents say no, then they are detaining those workers without any cause, right? They don't have a reasonable suspicion. What are they basing their reasonable suspicion on to detain someone? How they look? The clothes they wear? The color of their hair? What's the reasonable suspicion? So if a shift is over, or someone needs to pick up a child or has a medical appointment, and the employer says, are these workers free to leave? And they say, no, they're not free to leave. They are violating your constitutional rights, and that can be used later in court to try to have a case thrown out, right? It's important to document the violation of constitutional rights. For instance, if they go into the private areas without permission or a judicial warrant, document it. They just violated constitutional rights. If they detain people and do not permit them to leave, document it, violation of constitutional rights. Did the agents mistreat anyone? You should immediately notify the employees' union if there is a union. And if anyone is arrested, ask the agents where they're being taken, because this information will help the family and lawyer find the person, which is, I'm sure you're aware, that's becoming a problem. Where is the person, right? Where are they detaining them? Where are they sending them once they've issued deportation orders or violated their civil rights and have whisked them or kidnapped them and taken them out of the country? So it's very, very important to ask, where are you taking them, right? We also advise people to have someone designated to use a phone and to videotape everything, right? Someone stands back and just videotapes everything. So you have a written report right after the raid of how many agents, what did they say, what did they wear, what did they use, all that stuff. So you want a written report as much as people can remember, but then you also, if possible, want to have a phone documenting it, right? From outside, inside if you can. Now, they're going to be threatening and they're going to say you can't do that, but you can do that in the state of Washington as long as you're not in the way of the investigation, right? Very important to make a plan, very important to practice that plan. However you can see fit to practice it. Who's the designated frontline person to say, I'm not going to let you in the private area, you need to speak to my employer? Who's the designated person to receive the warrant, review the warrant, and say, this is not a valid judicial warrant, I'm not going to permit you to come in? See all those private red signs I've put up everywhere in my business? You can't go in there, right? who's the person to handle this? It's very important to designate in advance and to practice. Very important to familiarize yourself, as I said, with a judicial warrant versus administrative warrants, and that we have the right to insist that ICE obtains judicial warrants. We have the right to remain silent, not volunteer information that might result in our arrest. And we have the right to protect our businesses and our employees. Don't give them the information they need to arrest you. That's what they hope we will do because we don't know our rights. Well, we do know our rights. We will use our rights and we'll protect ourselves and each other. And I'll end there. Thank you all. Thanks for listening.
All right, so here we are at the point for questions and answers. We're going to stop the recording. Yeah, I'd like to take this moment to introduce our next speaker, Lorena Lowell from the Department of Commerce. All right, so Lorena, while you're getting your slides up, I just want to thank you so much for being here today. Lorena is a small business program manager at the Washington State Department of Commerce, and she's really going to share information about ways that business owners can develop exit strategies or have a plan for what happens next in their business. She's really incredibly seasoned in this work, and we're so grateful that you're here, Lorena.
I want to start by saying that I'm incredibly humble and delighted and grateful to be invited to this conversation. It's truly an honor to be working among all of you and to be part of this community and this ecosystem, kind of helping to support some businesses. So my name is Lorena Lowell, and I'm the program manager for the Washington State Employee Ownership Program. And prior to this, I was a small business advisor for the Small Business Development Center. So this is a little bit of where my background with business is coming from and why I'm just delighted to be here. And the intent of this presentation and speak a little bit about succession planning is to, in some way, can I help our clients and to really think about what to do with your business. What are the next steps? And in some situations, they may be in a rush to act. In other situations, they may just have some time to think about it. But I also, when I was advising businesses, I always felt that thinking about having an exit strategy or a succession planning from the beginning of the business, it is a very healthy way to manage a business. So with that, why is this a critical conversation for every business, especially at this time? Well, because change is constant, and we, as a business owner, we have to be ready. Business owners must always be prepared to adapt. Change is a normal part of running a business. Changes can come in many, many ways, and can look like we lose our key employees. We have to shift the location. There's financial market fluctuations, and there's new regulations. There's new policies, list goes on. But what is always a sure thing is there's always going to be some kind of change. And we have to react, but we have to be ready to react or adapt. What is a succession plan? A succession plan, it is an exit strategy and is a critical part of every business in their planning stages to ensure that there's a smooth transition in ownership and leadership, whether due to a retirement, plan an exit, or unexpected events. Why is this important? Well, it is important to make sure that we have a succession strategy or an exit plan to ensure the continuity of the business, if that's what we're planning to do, to preserve the knowledge of the business. If we're going to leave, what is the business all about? What is the history of the business? To protect the culture of the business, to minimize the risk and retain the key talent, and to build trust with customers, employees, and investors. What is the goal of an exit strategy? The goal of an exit strategy is to have a proactive plan that allows business owners to transition out of the business on their own terms. I highlighted this section and I want to spend a couple minutes on this because I think it's extremely important that the business owners at all times have control of their businesses. And to have control, we have to be prepared. And to have control, we have to have some internal strategies to anticipate and to adapt and to always kind of think about plan A and plan B and plan C. And I think, this conversation, and I cannot wait until we can have an opportunity to have a conversation among all of us to just kind of discuss, how can this look like? And how can, at these times, business owners can have the power to make the decisions. The reasons of an exit strategy can vary. It can be personal or it can be professional objectives. What does that look like? What does that mean? Well, do I want to get out of here because I need to cash out? Am I in a place, am I in a position, and I'm in a situation that I just need to get my cash out of this? Am I going to relocate or am I going to retire? Do I want my family to take over the business? Is this an internal transition that may look like, and when we transfer the ownership to employees, which is the ESOPs, which is basically what I do every day as my work right now. Or we are a business that has a mission and we want to make sure that that mission continues. So this is the goal. Why are we planning the strategy? And based on this goal, each transition in each strategy, each plan is going to look different. But we have to be very aware of what is the reason that we want to exit this business, or why is the need that we need to exit the business. So key components of a succession strategy. I want to take a minute to talk to really us identify and think about tangible and intangible assets. During the part of my career that I was working, or I've been working with the small businesses as a direct consultant or a business advisor, is I think a lot of businesses do not really think about their assets in terms of what is tangible and what is intangible. Usually businesses think an asset as of, the equipment that they have, the money that they have, the savings that they have, anything that is that's a tangible asset. But sometimes businesses just fail to recognize and to acknowledge there's a lot of intangible assets that are very valuable. What is that? A customer list. Some businesses actually are worth more money on a sale because they have a very solid list of customers. They have recipes, they may have patents, they may have, a great vendor list with 20 years of relationship. That is an intangible asset. They may have key employees. They may have a very unique way to a unique product. Those are the intangible assets. And, I want to stress this out, and I cannot wait to hear what you think about this. And in any business plan, or especially when we are thinking about leaving the businesses, we really need to think carefully about what are my assets and what is what I'm selling and what is what I'm not giving value in this sale or in this transaction or when I'm leaving. And in some cases where businesses need to cease operations for unexpected events, and I'm saying cease operations for unexpected events, what I mean by that is then suddenly just have to close for a minute, like we saw in COVID or in other emergencies, and you just got to situations and you just have to stop operation of the business. I think it's really important to recognize the assets, to have a very good account of them, to be able to reopen that business and make sure that those intangible assets are not lost during the time that our business is closed. Identifying the key roles and skills is incredibly important, and we are very clear about what are the key roles in our business. Is the baker the key role? It is the construction guy the key role? It is the executive director the key role? What are the key roles and the skills that we need to be able to operate our business, and if we have to downsize? Do we have a succession plan, and how does this look like? We have to think about training and developing our staff. A communication strategy. Communication is incredibly important, and any time of a transition, we need to make sure that our Clients are aware of what's happening. Our staff is aware. Our vendors are aware. Our lenders are aware of what's happening. And with the communication, the trust is being built, and then support the continuation and the success of an exit strategy. Legal and financial considerations. I'm going to touch a little bit more about this in the next slides, but we need to kind of think about what are all the legal and financial considerations we have to think about this business. Is this going to have a tax implications? Do we have capital gains? Do we have sales? Do we have loans that cannot be absorbed by the next entity or by the next owner? So we have to be really aware of in those transactions, what do we have? And I'm going to use an example. A couple of days ago, I was in a presentation and with somebody from the SBA, and I asked her a question. I said, well, what happens with all the COVID loans if somebody has to suddenly leave the country? And her answer was, if the loan is being paid, it's not going to be called. So what does that mean? And I kind of want to emphasize that the question, again, I'm going to repeat it because I think in these times is very important. If the person that actually is the guarantor for an SBA loan, like a lot of small businesses have COVID loans or PPP loans, and those loans, as long as they're paid, they are not called. And then, just kind of write it there. If you have some questions, we can talk about it later. Testing and feedback. It is really important as we are thinking about the transition or the exit strategy. We do some testing with our staff as other ways to do the business, other ways to operate the business as somebody else can take over, and monitoring and updating, and of course, exit strategy considerations. And I'll talk a little bit more about it. Exit strategy considerations. Let's talk about legal documentation and structure. We need to make sure that, especially right now, will be a good time, in my opinion. And if I was still doing business advising, I will probably spend some time with my clients, kind of doing a check-in of all the legal structure. Who is the owner of the company? Is a sole proprietor? It is LLC? What is the legal structure? And that it is incredibly important, in my opinion, because each structure may have some legal protections. Some structures may have some more legal protections than other ones. So what's your status look like? Do we have an operating agreement? I found very often that a lot of businesses do not actually have an operating agreement. What is an operating agreement? An operating agreement is a legal document that basically describes what happens with the business if I'm not here. Let's say something happens to me tomorrow and I don't have an operating agreement. The fate of the business may be complicated. And I mean, I'm not going to get into the legalities of having a will and blah, blah, blah. That's a different conversation. But in an operating agreement, if something was to happen to me tomorrow and I don't have some provisions for my business that said, in case that I can not longer be in charge of the business, my estate will take over, or, this person can have authority to sign for the company accounts. All of that is a part, there's more pieces to that, because also the operating agreement talks about exit strategies. I mean, I'm using that term as it's not specifically in the operating agreement said exit strategy, but actually has provisions for sales or for transfers. And if there is different partners, who can make the both are needed. So that's a very long conversation. But what I want to highlight is if you have clients that are, I will recommend that maybe just ask them and take a look about if they have an operating agreement and how the operating agreement is defined and who has legal power and authority to continue the business if it's needed. And in some cases that can also be done by establishing a power of attorney. Explore exit options. What are my options if I need to exit the business immediately? Can I sell it? And then we go back to the part that I was talking before is, what can I sell? What can I sell? I mean, it's the only thing I can sell is, my assets, the equipment, blah, blah. And that's where the inventory comes as a very important part of this conversation. Am I going to transfer the ownership to a family member? Is this family member capable to run my business? Is that a good idea? Or should I transfer to somebody else? Do I think, or should I consider to transfer my business to sell all the stocks of the company to all my employees? And how would luck look at? And then, I always also recommend to have some kind of financial planning, and have a lot of businesses cannot afford to have a financial advisor. However, they are incredibly capable small business advisors and the Small Business Development Center. Then, even though they're not financial planners, they have an incredible amount of expertise and resources, and it can help small businesses to navigate, a financial planning for an exit strategy. And then just kind of have a discussion about what are the goals, what are my long-term goals in this retirement or the sale of the business. And for example, it could be then, I'm gonna close my business for the next 3, 4, 5 years, or I'm gonna stop operations for the next 3, 4, 5 years for whatever reasons. And what are the implications and what are the considerations? Can the business survive to be closed for a year or two? So those are some of the financial planning and considerations that I think at this time, when we have so much uncertainty in so many ways, it will be worth to start exploring it and talk to some advisors. And so just to mention, what the employee ownership structures are, that will be the employee stock ownership plans, the co-ops, and the trust. These are some tools. These are some business structures. And actually, if we decide to sell to our employees or clients, could be, then the clients can just kind of become a co-op. In case of the childcare businesses, it's just becoming a little bit more as a trend, and childcare centers are looking into becoming co-ops. But these are the 3 main structures that we can discuss with our business advisors. And finally, why is succession planning important? Succession planning is a key to keeping your small business strong and stable. A clear path helps your business to run smoothly, protects valuable knowledge, and gets your team ready to lead. Planning ahead reduces uncertainty, keeps important people on your team, builds trust with the staff, customers, and investors. Whether you're stepping away soon or years from now, starting succession planning today lays the groundwork for future success. And with that, I am happy to take any questions.
Beautiful, Lorena, and thank you for that well thought through and informative presentation. So thank you everyone for this opportunity to serve together, to be together, to support each other together. This is the official end of our webinar today. We appreciate everyone who came. We appreciate our speakers. And just want to say that we are in this together. And so for the webinar today, the Worksite ICE raids, immigration compliance, and succession planning for business owners, we thank you humbly for your time. Have a great afternoon.